Hey there, Section 56ers. This is Michael. Welcome to week 3. I wanted to just give you an overview, talk a little bit about what happened last week and where we're going with our project that's going to be due this Sunday. And also Section 56ers, thank you again for everyone moving into this section and all the great comments and participation that you guys have done this week. Maybe you need a nickname, just so. I'm trying to keep them both separate. Maybe you help me out with that, so you guys could come up with something maybe. What the point of this week was, and I think everyone did a great job of going along, trying to find some content sources. So really, we're just looking for some content that you'd find interesting. And part of the exploration of Twitter was, in my mind, I felt as though if there was any huge amount of content out there, it's Twitter. It's pretty vast, but it has lots of limitations. So by querying it and understanding the different fields that go along with it, I think you guys got some realization. This is like the world's quickest database class. So while any of you have taken database class, you'll understand like there's all these different fields. They might have a controlled vocabulary, meaning there's yes or no fields, things like that, and that's used for display and for adding meaning to a particular piece of content. Although in Twitter's case, the content itself might be just some text, 144 characters. It might have hashtags, which many of you discovered and we'll get around to later, was something that was invented to help try to find stuff on Twitter, because it's just this is like a very unstructured database. But it does have structure. So what we're looking for is to find some content out there that we think is interesting, that has structure. So my example is I found this place that sells these perfume supplies, and I'm interested in making things and making smells. And I found that was really hard to deal with, and I tried to extract that data from that source. You'll find this week that I'll kind of take that one step further, and I want you to as well. One thing that wasn't completely clear, and nobody seemed to do it, is that Airtable, through this link, has these example databases. And for example, here's a bug tracker, here's conference planning. These example databases were fine to just choose as is. So here's one, here's the fields along with it, and some example content. So if you just said, I want to do this, I'd be fine with it. Again, I'm not saying these are the greatest databases, but they're pretty good examples of how you start to organize things in a repeatable format. And they have topics like a campaign. As far as I know, nobody did that, but if at the moment I'm trying to check if anyone's particularly lost or having difficulty with the class, I don't expect you all to have a great amount of expertise in these areas, so I want you to learn them and learn them together. So that's number one. The other is going to a place where you might find something, and I think a popular thing is finding something that's already curated, like the top 50 records or the top 50 movies, and scraping that data using one of these tools. And if anyone had difficulty with scraping, it's understandable. In fact, the information you see on a website might not be particularly useful in a scraped format. But that's fine. I mean, that's what the exploration is to find out. Like, is it good? Is it bad? Is it usable or not? But is to see how do you break it into pieces? Because that breaking it into pieces is how we begin to start to look for patterns and organization. Thirdly, I talked about your computer only because that's another example of stuff we just think of as here's a bunch of content. How did over many, many years we come to organize that content? I think you guys explored it well. It's just, again, if you thought about it, if you had to organize this stuff, and I think many of you did discover that I don't believe we organize our stuff on our computer very well. So that's fine. It's really just saying, here's a file, it could have a name, which could be the most important thing, and the only way I can find something on my computer is to remember the name, and we all have done it, and we've all found that to be lacking. So if you think of the tweet is there to be read by a human and maybe understood and maybe relevant. Same thing, here's a bunch of files on your computer. to find something relevant is hard. So we're just getting started with, we've got the lowest level here. We're just looking for content, which is stuff that's broken into pieces. Maybe it's got a date, maybe it's got a name. And if you looked at your computer, I happen to have a Macintosh, but a PC is pretty similar. And if you look at all the different things that you can use to organize a file, there's quite a few. So there's lots and lots of interesting information behind the scenes that helps the computer organize things, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to organize this data. So then finally, if you had questions, people were posting some ideas here. They were sending me ideas, and hopefully you got feedback from me. Most of you are on the right track, but that gets us to week 3. All right, so let's get to week 3. If you look at the module, there's a great video in there and some other content. And we're talking about 2 things this week. One is how do we connect things together. And so there's a mini course in here about Gestalt theory. And that just is how people perceive things as being related when in fact they may not be. And the reason why is you're going to see relationships. I just want you to, when you're looking at content, you might actually find things to be related just because they're in a table together. So if you looked at some of your data, you might have like URL, 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 and you could say, okay, there's 3 URLs. Well, if you really look at it, you're like, these 3 things may have nothing to do with each other. They're just a relationship or a pointer to some other thing. So so the relationship might be there just because they're next to each other, and that relationship for you may or may not be worthwhile. So let's just get quickly into my example. So I was looking at this place, and they had all these ingredients that you could buy about making perfume. The problem is most of the actual data on that is not very useful. It's like sizes and prices and stuff like that. I mean, it's useful if you're selling stuff, but it's not that useful for me. I'm trying to understand, how do you take these ingredients and make something? Well, then I went and found this other resource called Fragrantica, which takes a perfume itself and it breaks it into a million different pieces, different ways of describing that information. So I want you guys to go around the same topic, and maybe this is also where you help and collaborate more with each other. You might find, in fact, that many of you are interested in a set of data, and so there's some questions here about like what is it you're really focusing on. I know a couple people might be focusing on music or film or something like that. What are the possible ways to describe that film, and what are resources that you can use to expand how you can maybe mash up different sources to have more information to work with. So right now we're still trying to find something to work with. We're trying to not get too satisfied with relationships that may or may not be helpful to us later. So we're doing sort of a dissection analysis phase. And at the end of the week, what I really am looking for is you to give me a CSV or an Excel file with your exploration of the content and what it looks like. So I'm going to do a session this week about what does that actually entail. We looked last week and we started to build the form, so we understand data types a little bit, but it's really about what are the descriptors that we have and the subject that we want to tackle. And it is perfectly fine this week to find that many of you want to tackle a similar subject, and perhaps actually this week you can help each other find sources to be able to expand upon and give you more information and data to work with to manipulate that topic. So we're not into manipulation yet. We're still working on getting our content together. So as usual, I like to do this, let's contribute to these things. Let's comment early as we can in the week. Let's try to consider the week, one of the days this week to be the class time that we spend on this so that we can all help each other and not do everything on Sunday, because I just went through a lot of different comments, and they're all great, but we have to move on to the next week. So hopefully we got through that last one, and we'll get through this one, and talk to you guys soon.